Good morning. DEFRA admits it failed to follow the rules when allowing game birds to be released near special protected areas. The government has admitted that it unlawfully issued some licences for releasing game birds last year. The campaign group Wild Justice challenged the licences granted in the Deben estuary in Suffolk and Breckland in Norfolk, saying that ministers had ignored the advice from the wildlife regulator Natural England and that a proper assessment of the impact hadn't been carried out. By law, under the Habitats Directive, there must be an assessment of the impact of any release near Special Protected Areas, or SPAs, and advice from Natural England must be taken into account for a licence to be granted. While DEFRA concedes that it didn't follow Natural England's advice and that the assessment it carried out wasn't in line with the rules, it strongly refutes Wild Justice's claim that the decisions were, quote, tainted with the appearance of bias. Dr. Ruth Tingay, a co-director at Wild Justice, told me why it was important that the rules should have been followed.
Well, in this case, in relation to the outbreak of bird flu that was prevalent in the UK in 2022 and 2023, these protected sites, special protected areas, are designated for their conservation value, and they hold various species of high conservation value. So if you want to release game birds in those areas, which is what this case was all about, there was a very high risk in some instances that bird flu could be transmitted from those game birds to affect some of these species that live in these special protected areas. So from a conservation point of view, it's extremely important that the rules are followed.
And what did ministers do wrong?
The new rules from 2023 were that if you wanted to release game birds on an SPA, the landowner would have to apply for an individual licence from DEFRA. But initially, Natural England would look at the application and give their expert opinion on whether it was a suitable location for the release of game birds. So on these particular SPAs that we're interested in, the Deben estuary in Suffolk and the Brecklands SPA in Norfolk and Suffolk, Natural England, their advice was that DEFRA should not issue a licence for the Deben estuary because the risk of spreading avian flu was too high there. And in the case of the Breckland SPA, Natural England said that game birds could be released, but the dates for release should be delayed so as not to impact on those species on those sites. So Natural England sent that advice to DEFRA, and then it goes through what we describe as a very murky, secretive panel. We don't know who sits on that panel, but they assess Natural England's advice. And on these particular cases that we were interested in, those licence applications were then sent to the ministers, and what those ministers did was overturn Natural England's advice. But importantly and crucially in terms of the law, they didn't give what are called cogent reasons to explain those overturns.
DEFRA has conceded it didn't follow Natural England's advice and the assessment it carried out wasn't in line with the rules. But Wild Justice claimed that those decisions were tainted with the appearance of bias. Now, DEFRA refutes that absolutely. What do you say to that?
Well, we stand by that. The suspicion of bias is very strong. We can't prove that, and it can't be proven now because this case isn't going to court anymore, so we'll never know. But as far as we're concerned, that suspicion of bias remains very high.
And so now, what is the ongoing impact then of this decision that they didn't obey the rules that were set out? Are you expecting then the legislation to be clarified or for changes to be made?
Well, the situation with game bird licensing is continually evolving, and this year there are new licences. Applicants have to apply via Natural England, and Natural England will have to assess each individual application on a case-by-case basis and provide advice to DEFRA to say whether it's suitable or not to release game birds there. So if that process is still the same, then we would expect a greater deal more scrutiny from DEFRA in how they make the decisions whether to issue the licences or not.
Well, I suspect, seeing that they've admitted they've made a mistake, that they'll be pretty careful not to do that again.
Well, you'd hope so.
Dr. Ruth Tingay from Wild Justice. A DEFRA spokesperson said, given the unprecedented scale of the bird flu outbreak in 2022-23, we worked at pace to develop and implement new game bird licensing processes. Our priority was always to protect England's threatened wild bird species from the impact of the disease, while minimising disruption to a sector that makes important contributions to both nature conservation and the rural economy. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The studio manager in Bristol is Caitlin Gaisley, and the producer is Beatrice Fenton.